Hello guys, in this video we're going to be taking a look at UV unwrapping in Maya, an often neglected thing that people don't like to do because it can be considered to be quite boring, but it's very important before we do any kind of texturing. Now, if you don't know what UV mapping is, it is essentially like taking your model, in this case this cube that we have here, with a little bit of bevel applied, unwrapping it and making a flat representation of it that we can then apply textures to. The best kind of analogy that I've ever heard and that I tell people as well is if you imagine you have a piece of chocolate and it's wrapped up in one of those kind of old school foil wrappers or paper or plastic or whatever, and you unwrap it and it still has all the details on it like the branding and whatever other information, right, the color, but it's now flat. So it was maybe once a cube or a sphere, but now it's just laid flat. So that's basically what UV unwrapping is in a 3D sense as well. It works much the same way. And we've just got a few objects here today. We've got a cube, a cylinder, and a pipe, and we'll get to those in a bit. But we're just going to go over some of the most basic UV unwrapping kind of mistakes that people make, what to look out for, what to do, and a few little tips and tricks for actually making this easier for you. So we just have a very simple object, just a cube that I've applied a bevel to so that we can subdivide it. First thing we're going to do is we're going to open up the UV editor. So with our object selected, we're going to come up to UV up here and then go to UV editor, and you'll see a window like this. And if this is a new object like a cube, then you'll probably already have some UVs like this. If you ever kind of like made paper models or like geometry things at school, you probably made a cube out of paper and you would probably have something like this and you would fold it up. Maybe one of these squares would be over this side, right? But it's kind of like a cross or a T-shape. And this is the 2D representation I was talking about. So this is our UV shells. Okay, if I hold down right click, you can see we have various different selection objects here, kind of like how we do with geometry, but instead of faces, we have UV shells. If I go ahead and select that, we can move that around. And this is our UV grid here as well. Most important thing on the UV grid is to make sure that your UV shells are contained within one of these squares. You can have them in multiple squares, but as long as they're inside the lines, that's something called UDIMs if we have them in multiple squares like this. But that's a bit more complicated and we won't get into that in this video. This is just to keep it simple. So for one object, you want to keep all your UV shells within this square here, so from 0 to 1 in both U and V coordinates, or X and Y if you like. You consider it like that, like a graph. We also have UV points, which are kind of like vertices if you like. They're in the same place as the vertices are and you can move them too. And also edges as well. And you can see here when I click on this edge, it's actually highlighting both. And the reason for that is because you can see these highlighted white lines here. That's a UV seam or edge or cut, whatever you want to call it. Generally it's called a seam. And these are essentially cuts that you make on your model to tell Maya or whatever 3D software you're using, because this is going to be the same in Blender as well, where to actually unfold your model from. You know, so if we were to have a highlighted white line all around this cube, you can see here we just have 3 sides at the moment, then that would be a separate face. So let's go ahead and do this from scratch just to show you how this works. So to delete UVs, I'm just going to come up to UV and delete UVs. So now you can see with this selected, we have absolutely nothing visible. As long as you have the UV editor open, with your object selected, we can go to edge mode, select one of the edges, okay, and then we can go up to UV and then cut UV edges. That will do it. Or with the edge selected, we can then mouse over our UV editor, hold down shift and right click, and also go to cut. But you can see right now that's actually not doing anything, and the reason for that is because we first of all need to do a basic projection. We need to have something on the board to actually work with. If we have nothing here, we can't add any cuts because Maya doesn't know what to do with it. So the first thing that we need to do is come up to UV and we need to do a projection. So we have a few different types of projection. We could do a cylindrical projection, and you're going to see these different handles here. This essentially, like the name suggests, cylindrically, so kind of like 360 degrees around the object, uses it kind of projects the shell, the UV map, if you like, cylindrically. That's the simplest way I can explain it. We also have planar projection as well, which, as you might have guessed, is just in a plane. And you can see here, because it's just one plane in basically 2 dimensions, we're only getting one side of our cube. So it's kind of like projecting it directly on from this. Now that can work just to get something on the board. What I typically like to do is UV and then camera-based projection, and you can see now it's like it's taken a snapshot of our model from the camera angle that we had. It's not really entirely important because we're going to be unwrapping this anyway, and we'll get into what unwrapping is in a second. So now that we have a projection, what do we do next? So we need to cut our edges. So we're going to go back into edge selection mode, and we're going to start cutting some edges here. Now, we could just go ahead and cut all the squares and have them all separate, like if I was to do that now. We'll go ahead and select these and then hold down shift and then go to cut, and you can see now that's taken that face off. So we could go ahead and have them all separate like this. You could do that, but it's not the most efficient way to do it, and it's not ideal. And the way you UV something will change based on what kind of needs you have for the textures of your object. But with a simple object like this, we probably want to keep this all as one piece, just because it's going to be easier for us to actually go ahead and texture later. So let's go ahead and actually add these cuts in here. So with a cube, we're looking to generally just keep this as one piece. So it looks simple, but at least when I first started doing this, I would sometimes get confused about which edges to actually cut. You essentially want to go around the outside like this, except instead of on the top having this edge cut here, you want to leave this one uncut. So if we get and cut that, I'm going to hold down right click, go to UV shell so we can select everything. Then on the right hand side here, there's this little drop down called unfold. Once you've added your cuts, to actually get your 2D representation of it, you want to click on unfold here. And if I do that, you can see that we actually have missed an edge. Now that's because we've got some bevels here, and that can happen from time to time. So I'm just going to select that edge there, go ahead and cut, and then we'll unfold that again. So you can see now we're getting our T shape, our cross shape, which is a 2D representation. And we had to press unfold to get that to happen. But it's kind of off at an angle, and that's not really something that we like to do. To fix that, you can come under this drop down here, arrange and layout, and there's various different things we can do. You're going to click orient shells, and by default it's also going to be quite big, so we can just use the regular transform tools. We'll just scale it down to fit into our square here. Okay, so that is just how you do a very, very simple unwrap on your cube. So you know how to cut edges, how to unwrap, how to orient things, and this is like the most basic kind of form of UV unwrapping that you could do. Now that we have this, there's one little trick that we can do to actually see how our textures will look on our model before we even go and texture them, and this is going to be using something called a checkerboard texture. If you think like a chessboard, it's kind of got those black and white, typically black and white anyway, checkerboard look to it. There is one built into Maya by default. If with your model selected and the UV editor open, you click this button up here, which is actually a checkerboard, you'll see that we have this black and white checkerboard on our model now. And because we've laid it out like this, there isn't any distortion. You would see it in the checkerboard if there was. And it's all the correct scale. It's going up the sides. And that looks nice and correct for us. But the default Maya one is not the best. So I recommend you actually go ahead and download another one like this. The reason why I like this one, there's many different varieties, but this one's quite high contrast. We've got all these different letters and numbers on here so we can see if there is any distortion, and we don't want distortion typically, because that means then if we go ahead and texture our model, you'll also get distortions in those textures and it just won't look right. So you can get this one for free. Once you go ahead and download that, I've just gone ahead and saved it here to my Maya folder and just called it Checker Texture Map. We can just go ahead and apply any old material, a Lambert even in this case, and then just plug that file into the color, and then we'll be able to see that in our scene. Okay, and then you want to just make sure you click this button here to turn on textured, and now you can see that we have this nicer, higher contrast checkerboard texture on there. And we don't have any distortion in the letters, which is good. That's what we like to see. So I'll just show you what some distortion looks like so you know what to avoid. And we'll just turn this off here so we can see this properly. If I go ahead and go to UV point mode, which again is just like the vertices, and I start moving some of this stuff around like this. So you can see now this is no longer following the shape of our cube, and we're getting a massive amount of distortion here. You can see these letters have all got squished. It just suddenly drastically changes. Some of these squares are going at an angle. So the reason you can see now why this checkerboard is so useful is because you can spot things like this which really aren't ideal. You know, if you imagine you had a wood grain coming up here, it would be going straight like you expect, and it would get up here and then suddenly go ooh and bend this way, right? And that's not what you want, because it would look unnatural. So that's the importance of having nice clean UVs. Okay, so now that we've done a cylinder, or now that we've done a cube, sorry, let's go ahead and do a cylinder. So how would you do this? This is pretty similar to a cube, but a little different. So we'll go ahead and do our camera-based projection again. And there's two different ways we could do this. We could literally just select the two bottom and top caps, go ahead and cut those, and then add one cut here. You know, if I was to do that now, then unfold all this. You can see that's, you know, we have the top and bottom caps, and then we have the side piece, which has gone straight like this. But like with the cylinder, there's another way we can do this so we can keep this as one piece. So select your top and bottom caps, select one edge, okay, like this, and then just deselect these two edges, and then go to cut, and then we'll go ahead and unfold that again. So you can see now that combines it into one piece. Again, you might not want to do that. You might want to have it separate for whatever reason, and that's okay. It's also come in at a different angle. We'll just go ahead and orient that. Sometimes you might not want it to lay flat orientated like this. We could then go to transform, and then we can rotate it so that it goes straight up or down. It really depends on however way you want to orient your textures. If you're going to be doing texture painting in some software like Mari or Substance Painter or 3D Coat, it's not going to matter so much since you're painting directly onto the model. Again, we always want to make sure that's just sitting within our UV shells, or within our first UV square, our first UDIM here. Okay, so you might be wondering why I'm doing the cuts directly on the edges like this. Okay, if I were to just get rid of these UVs, redo a camera-based projection, and let's say instead of adding the cut directly on the corner piece like this, or the edge where it meets the top, we added it here. Okay, if I go ahead and add a cut there, and then we add a cut here. Okay, and if I just unfold that, and then just orient that so that's sitting flat, and then we'll go ahead and apply that Lambert texture that we had with our nice checkerboard. You can see that's looking good. Okay, but if I press 3 on the keyboard to smooth this, you can see we're getting a massive amount of stretching up here, right? And you might be thinking, well, why is that happening? Well, it's because if you've ever done subdivision modeling, you'll know that these holding edges actually slide. You can see that here with our, the wireframe turned on. This edge here that we've added our seam on is sliding all the way down here, and that's affecting our UVs, and it will affect our texture as well, as you can see from the checkerboard. So if I were to just redo this and do it the way we did it before, and go on those corners there, and then we unfold this again, and then just orient that so we make sure that's lying flat. If I smooth this now, you can see we're not really getting any distortion on those edges, and that's because with our bevel, if you've done this correctly, we'll just turn this off so you can see this better for the time being. With our bevel, if you've done this correctly, this edge here will actually stay in place roughly, right? It will go in a little bit, but that's not really going to affect it anywhere near as much as if it was to slide this much. So whenever you're doing your UVs, if you have bevels and you're planning to subdivide, always do it at the corner like this, right? Or at least make sure that there's an equal distance edge so that your edge isn't going to slide. And that will keep things nice and clean. So the last thing we're going to take a look at is how to UV unwrap a pipe. Now, I see people struggling with this kind of thing quite a lot. Far more complex shapes than this. Like, you know, imagine you have a wire or a cable that's all sort of like bent in your scene or something like that. And you're thinking, oh, how do I UV unwrap that? So again, we're going to do it much the same way, but there's a few different quirks to this. So we'll do a camera-based projection again. Okay. So we have our representation there. We'll go ahead. What I like to do is just cut the caps first, just to get those out of the way. And then we'll move that UV shell out there. And then we'll just go ahead and select this entire inside edge. Like so. Okay, and then we'll cut that. Get the UV shell and then unfold. Okay, now this one isn't too bad. If I go ahead and orient this, if this pipe was a bit more complicated, we'd get a lot more wobbliness to this. But you can see, unlike the cylinder, it's kind of bent, right, like this. And then it's also got this weird shape at the end. Now, if I were to go ahead and just unfold everything here, and then lay this out in our UDIM here, our UV tile, and then apply that texture that we have for the grid, or the checkerboard. Okay. And then if we look at the end where we've got this going on, it's a little difficult to see, but you are getting a little bit of distortion, and that's not really something you want. It will be a lot more apparent on something that has much more of a bend to it. But with this, it's not looking too bad, but this is still not something that you want, ideally. You want to keep these as straight as possible. Reason for that, again, is just because you're going to have some texture distortion. So how do we make this straight? Well, there's a couple different ways we can do this. If we go to edge selection mode, and then just select the middle edge, and then under unfold, we've got a feature here called straighten shell. I'm just going to press that, and you can see that's starting to straighten out this, right? It just, if I undo that, you can see it got rid of that kind of kink there, that bend in it. If I do that again, that's now made it straight. It hasn't quite resolved this. You can press it over and over again, and it will kind of try and resolve it as much as possible. But straighten shell is only really good for straightening the whole shell. You can see here we still have these kind of bent edges on the inside. That's, again, something you don't really want for cylinders, unless that's like specifically something you need to do. The other thing we can do is if we go to UV selection mode and just double click any of the UV points, that's going to select the entire shell's worth of points. Okay. Just above straighten shell, we also have straighten UVs. If I go ahead and press that, that could take a while because there's a lot of points depending on how complex your shape is. So this is why generally I like to do UVs before subdividing, because you're just going to have an easier time. Your computer will work faster. Even if you have a beast of a computer, Maya's going to hate you and it's going to crash and you'll be sad. So do it when things are lower poly. So if I just press straighten UVs there, you can see now that's straightened everything out. We have this nice even topology. Even though we have this bend here, it's going in a straight line. And you can see because it's going in a straight line, our numbers are actually following the curvature of the cylinder. Okay, and that is ideally what you want. You know, let's say you had a cable texture going along here. It would naturally in real life bend along it like this. If I were to just do a planar projection from the side, something like this. Okay. You can see that we're just getting like the side profile, right? And sometimes when you unfold something, it will look a bit like this. And you can see we're not getting too much distortion, but the pattern or the numbers aren't actually following the direction. They're not flowing along the cylinder like they were before, if that makes sense. So if you were to add a texture to this, like a braided cable or something, it wouldn't follow this correctly like a real cable would. So whenever you're doing pipes like this, just consider kind of what material you're going to be applying it to, what the purpose of this model is, and then UV unwrap accordingly. So if this was going to be a cable, you would do it how we had it before. If we just undo that, and you have it straight like this, so it's curving along nicely, okay? The last thing we're going to take a look at, just to demonstrate that really properly, I'm going to create a torus or a donut, whatever you want to call it. We'll just scale that up a little bit. By default, that does have some UVs, but to demonstrate this, I'm going to just remove those, do a camera-based selection, and just re-UV unwrap this. So I'll just select this entire edge there, and then I'll go ahead and select this entire inside edge. Little trick on why I like to select the inside edges generally is because even in a perfect world, you're probably going to have some kind of seam right here because there is a cut. Things might not line up 100% perfectly. Even in today's day and age with all the technology we have, it has got better over time. But you might still see something. Instead of doing the outside edge, where it might be more obvious, you kind of just want to hide seams as much as possible if you can. We'll go ahead and cut that, and then unfold. You can see here, now that I've unwrapped this, we're getting the same distortion if I go ahead and apply our material. You can see we're getting this kind of warping towards the point where this seam is, and it's okay on the edges here, but it's not really ideal. So we want to go ahead and straighten this out as well. Let's first orientate it. And straightening these can be a bit harder, but sometimes you get lucky. We'll just straighten the UVs. And you see there, it hasn't done it quite perfectly. So sometimes what you can do in this case is we can select this middle edge and we can come back to use straighten shell, and we can tap that a bunch of times just to even out some of the kinks, and then we'll go ahead and select UVs and then straighten UVs, and then now that's made that a square for us and made it more even. You can see now we are getting some distortion still, right? Like the outside here is a lot bigger than the inside, and you can see even in the UVs we're getting like more compressed quads in the middle, and they're expanding out towards the center. So it can be a bit tricky to get this kind of shape without distortion, and it's really just trying to minimize it as much as possible, and it depends what you're doing. Another way to UV unwrap this, if I go ahead and just do another camera based, if I were to just add 2 cuts here along the middle, and then we go ahead and unfold that, you can see that kind of works. But again, like with the pipe, it's not quite following the shape of things, you know? If you're going to texture paint this in software like, again, like Substance, that might be okay. But if you wanted it to run along the kind of the width of this, let's say, or the length of it, I don't know what you would call it, the radius maybe, like say it was like a floaty for a pool or something and you needed the texture to run around it like text, then you'd want it to go in a straight line rather than be the same kind of donut representation like this. But yeah, I hope that's helped in some way. These are just some very, very basic UV tips, and I would definitely recommend using a checkerboard like this when you're checking your UVs. One last little thing to check. Sometimes your UV shells might be a different size once you unfold. Well, obviously we know that the top and bottom of this donut are the same size. But with that scaled down, you can see the letters down here are a lot bigger than they are up here, and that's not ideal. We kind of want to keep the texture density, or textile density as it's known, the same size. With the tools part here, you can see we have a few different things. We actually have a textile density section. If I go ahead and select each part, and then click set, if I go ahead and select each part and then click get, you can see that says 34. If I try this one, it says 23. So those are two different sizes, with this being the same object. And generally you want the textile density to be the same on everything. Let's say we want it to be, this object here represents the kind of texture density we want, and we can see that demonstrated by our checkerboard texture. We'll just go back to the tools section and we'll click get to get that. So we've got 23. We'll click the rest of our shells, in this case just this one, and we'll click set. Okay, and then if we wanted to quickly lay this out, we could hold down shift and then go to layout and then layout UV, and then that will evenly place everything in there for us. Sometimes it doesn't do a great job, so you have to do that a bit yourself to make sure it's not going over the edges. But yeah, that's kind of all of the UV basics. I hope that's helped in some way. If you were struggling with it, if you have any questions at all, please do let us know. It's a bit of a boring topic, but it's something that's very, very important for 3D before you're going to be doing any kind of like texturing, if it's texture mapping and not procedural and so on, stuff like that. But yeah, thank you very much for watching. We'll see you next time, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Yeah, bye-bye.